With the Stanley Cup final over and the regular season now upon us and the NHL Draft coming up, where do the Lightning go from here? We'll talk about all that and more on today's episode. But first, let's play that music.
You're Locked On Lightning, your daily podcast on the Tampa Bay Lightning. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to another episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Adam Danker. I'd like to thank you for making this episode your first listen of the day. If you're watching us on YouTube, I'd like to thank you for making this episode your first watch of the day. This podcast is available wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form, as well as on YouTube. On this episode, we're talking about where do the Lightning go from here after falling the Stanley Cup final, even though they had a great season. You know, they always want to walk away with some hardware. But where do the Lightning go from here? Back to the drawing board. Time to retool. Time to bring in new players, move guys around, create cap space. It's going to be a busy offseason, as well as we have the NHL Draft coming just right around the corner. So a lot of news coming over the last couple of days, especially with exit interviews. It was announced earlier today that the Lightning are actively working with Ryan McDonagh to try and see if they could figure out a deal because of his no trade clause. Where can they move his money off the books to another team, create that cap space that the Lightning so desperately need? And right off the bat, I don't agree with this. I think that Ryan McDonagh is a very important part of this team. He's been a very important part of the last two cup runs, as well as this playoff run that the Lightning had. He was a huge reason as to why the Lightning were able to dominate the Florida Panthers in that series, and as well as at certain times kept the Lightning in the game against in the games, against the Avalanche. Obviously, he's not the lifeblood around this defensive core, by no means not, but having him on that second line with Eric Chernak, those two guys who are not afraid to jump in front of pucks. And obviously, you interchange those guys and you move them around depending on what John Cooper wants to do. But having those two guys on the defensive core, especially together, I think adds such a nice compliment towards Victor Hedman and Jan Rutta, as well as Mikhail Sergachev and Zach Bogosian on the bottom line. But I don't think, even though that I feel like Ryan McDonagh, yes, has he missed a ton of time because of injuries and all that. And he's no spring chicken. He's getting up there in age, been around the league quite very, very long. So, but he's 33. He's 33. I think this is, and I totally understand both sides of it. I understand the Lightning need to move money around. They're getting to a point where they need to make some tough decisions. Completely understandable move here. And from a GM perspective, I completely get it. I'd probably do it as well. For the next, actually until 2026-27, Lightning are paying Ryan McDonagh 6.7.5 over the next couple of years AAV. So, that is something definitely. And other than Victor Hedman from the defensive core, Ryan McDonagh makes the most money out of any defenseman on this team. So completely understand why you want to shift some money around. He's by the time he becomes a UFA, he's going to be well into his late 30s. So you definitely want to capitalize on the value that he has now. But having said that, if you're willing and well, not really so much willing, but wanting to be successful, continue to be successful, while continuing to retool in a way, and I know a lot of people are kind of on the fence. Ryan McDonagh is very well loved throughout Lightning fans and just Bolts Nation in general, by me included, as you could tell. You also got to move guys and make deals that, you don't necessarily want to make. I think moving Ryan McDonagh isn't the right move here. I think that the Lightning need to look at this a different way. You already have money coming off the books from Jan Rutta. He's a UFA now. So you have that right there. He's due to make about, I would say, maybe close to 6.5, probably a little lower on the end. Jan Ruda's 31 years old. In my opinion, I've spoken about it on Twitter quite a bit, how I think the best course of action for the Lightning is to keep the defensive core for the most part. These guys, it's very, very valuable to a team, especially a team like the Lightning, who need to go into the playoffs and have that defensive core. Guys who are able to be familiar with each other, who have been playing with each other for a very long time. It's very important to have guys who know where the other one's going to be at all times and who are very familiar with each other. So I think what the Lightning should do, keep Ryan McDonagh. I would be very shocked, even though there is the conversation being had. I would be very shocked if the move actually does happen. But keep Ryan McDonagh and let Jan Ruda walk. Bring Cal Foote up to the NHL level. I think it's time. You have so much has been spoken about this Lightning prospect pipeline, and yes, it's not as lucrative. It's not as rich as maybe other teams have. Obviously that comes into play with obviously being successful, being in the Stanley Cup final or close to it every single year. So there's that. You're not drafting relatively high or early at all. Last couple of years, the Lightning have traded away their first round draft picks, and they have a first round draft pick this year. Finally, let Cal Foote into the mix, have him play. And it's easier said than done because obviously you have to find that nice mix. But just going off this list right now, if you have Jan Ruda walk in free agency, that opens up the door. You put Zach Bogosian up on that first line with Victor Hedman. You have Zach Bogosian, that grizzled defender who could play physical, alongside Victor Hedman, who could do pretty much a bit of everything. I think regardless, a lot of people like to bring into mind, stick side, whether, what kind of shot they are. I don't really look at that as a huge deal. Zach Bogosian plays on the right side anyway, as opposed to Victor Hedman on the left. So I don't mind it as much anyway. Those guys have played together before in the past. I believe it was during the first Cup run where Bogosian was playing with Hedman. So, they are familiar playing with each other, and they have played with each other at certain points throughout the regular season. And then you slide in Cal Foote with Mikhail Sergachev. I think Mikhail Sergachev is now at a point in his career where he's going to turn 25 this year. He's been with this Lightning team for quite some time. He has shown through his experience, especially during the playoffs the last couple of years, that he is able to somewhat be the quarterback of that third line or of a line. So it's not too far-fetched to say, give Cal Foote that experience, because eventually he's going to have to be thrown into the fire, whether it be through an injury or the Lightning having to play him at some point, whether it because trading him or whatever the case may be. So I say play the young guys, play Cal Foote, let Jan Ruda walk. And I'm not trying to discredit anything Jan Ruda has done over his time with the Lightning. He's played, for the most part, relatively well, but the way he plays the game, and you couple that in with sometimes with the injuries that he has, I don't believe it fits into what the Lightning are trying to accomplish. And I certainly don't believe that it warrants 5.5 or more AAV. So we'll talk more about the Lightning, what their needs are going to this regular season, who should leave, who should stay, certain deals. We'll talk about that going forward as well, because, especially going into the draft, the Lightning are going to be basing a lot of their draft picks around what they already have. You got to take a look within before you could really search around the league or in the NHL draft for more help down the line. But first, I want to talk about our sponsor of the day, and that is BetOnline.net. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all your betting needs and sports info. BetOnline is a continued source for all the sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. And BetOnline remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. So, like I said before, the Lightning need to really, and I feel like I've been seeing some tweets online, and I just want to acknowledge one real quick. Obviously, I hope this was a joke, because the level of I I don't even know what to call it. I guess confusion that I had at least, or maybe that this person has. It was brought to my attention on Twitter that an individual, whether they're a Lightning fan or in the know, I don't really know, but they suggested that the Lightning should trade Andre Vasilevsky, free up cap space, which I I get what the reasoning is. He's making 9.5. Um, totally understandable. A year through 2027, 28. Having said that, um, well, at the end of 2027, 28. So, he's on the books for 9.5 for quite some time over the next 5 years at least, in which he'll be 32, 33. So, yes, I understand. I understand the money part of that. But to sit here and even suggest trading away your one of your star players, also the best goaltender on the face of the planet, is ludicrous. It's absolutely ludicrous. If we were talking about maybe a forward or another player, maybe I would entertain the thought. Yes, the Lightning do have quite a few players on this roster that are making 9.5. Some are making 8.5. Those are, the 8.5. Steven Stamkos, not talking about that. That's totally, he's off limits. He becomes a UFA in 2024, 25. But I think I think it would be absolutely insane, and I don't think any GM, regardless of who they are, if you had if you had a goaltender like Andre Vasilevsky on your team, I don't see any GM that would even have the stones to make that trade. But other players on this team, I think, are fair game. I'm not talking about the Kucherovs. I'm not talking about the points. Obviously, I said Stamkos, not on the list. But some of the players that I'm looking at right now, and this one player, and it seems like last couple of years, especially last season and the season before next, after the first cup, the bubble cup, Alex Killorn's name it seems as though on a yearly basis has come up in speculative trade talk every year, and deservingly so. He's 32 years old. He's making 4.4 and a half this year, and then becomes a UFA in 23, 24. So I would imagine Alex Killorn is going to want to try and get more in the free agent period during the 23 free agency market. And I don't think the Lightning are willing to give him more than what he makes right now. He had a great season heading into the bubble. He had a very productive season last year as well. This year was a little bit of a step back, and as well as during the playoffs, he was pretty much non-existent on the offensive side of things. And that was disappointing. And I think ultimately, not wholeheartedly, but ultimately was one of the reasons why the Lightning fell short. One of the contributing factors, at least, to the Colorado Avalanche. But I think that the Lightning really need to sit down with him, not sit down with Ryan McDonagh and speak with Killorn. And I know this might be a little bit unpopular, but if Julian Brisebois is serious, if he's very serious about re-signing Palat, bringing back Paul, this is a deal that I don't think only needs to be I think needs to be made. It needs to be made. It 100% needs to be made in the offseason. Because I think there's no doubt, obviously, Andre Palat is a huge part of this team and is a huge part of the identity of this franchise. Having said that, you also look at Nick Paul, what he has brought to the table, what he has shown what he could do in only the 2-3 months that he was with this team. You have to bring him back. I can't see a scenario where Nick Paul doesn't come back to the Lightning. I think even if you can't bring Andre Palat back, if you can't make the money work, which I feel like in a way, and we'll talk about that more as we get closer. I think that the Lightning may get lucky because I think Tampa is home to Palat. I think that he doesn't want to go anywhere else, and I think he also just doesn't want to start over. He knows what he has here, and I think he's willing to give the Lightning somewhat of a hometown discount. But having said that, if you can't work out a deal with Palat and you bring back Paul and you still have Killorn, this goes back to my point before about the defensive side of things. You have the young talent, and we're not talking fresh-faced prospects coming out of the AHL or jumping from the junior hockey straight from the draft. We're talking about somewhat grizzled veterans to a certain extent, if you really want to call them that, coming from the AHL. One guy that comes to mind that I think would be able to slide in on that wing position. Now, depending on where he plays, I think he would be better used on the third line, and then you could probably catapult Ross Colton up to the second or even the first line. And that is where even the second line, if you have Killorn, you could bring him up to the first, and then you could put Ross Colton on the second line. But the guy that really comes to mind, and I kind of hinted at it during the playoff run, was Alex Barré-Boulet. I thought Alex Barré-Boulet hasn't played a ton of minutes this year, obviously. Was put on waivers at one point, sent to the Kraken, was put on waivers there, came back to Tampa. But his performance during the playoffs and then last season, during the shortened season, the 50-somewhat games, I think his performance during that season, you could make the case, well, he didn't exactly, the season was shortened, the game was played a certain way. I thought he showed enough to prove, at least to front office and as well as his teammates, that he could play at this level. It's all about consistently getting out there and getting the ice time, which is why it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world to maybe settle on a trade. If you could make the Killorn trade work and just get his money off the books, and if you could get lucky with Palat, maybe talk him down from, maybe get him in the 5.5, 6.5 range, I think the Lightning will be fine there. And of course, I'm only talking numbers off the cuff. I'm not really diving into the cap space. But that will free up some space. And there's a ton of other moves that could potentially be made. So there's that as well. But if you could bring back Paul, you bring back Palat, I think that Barré-Boulet in the mix will definitely be something that will really help Tampa down the road. And then there's also talk that I've heard from other circles that the Lightning are really, really not really impressed, but Jack Finley, the draft pick from last year, he has definitely been proving himself that maybe eventually down the road, whether it be this season or the following season, that is a name that could be thrown into the mix going forward. But yeah, as much as you want to bring back all these guys who have really, really contributed to the Lightning's current success and past success, tough decisions have to be made. And you can't blame the Lightning. These contracts were all signed and done during a time where we all thought the money, the cap space was going to be there. Obviously, that didn't happen with things with COVID. But I really think that if there was ever a time that the Lightning needed to and should invest in what they have waiting up in Syracuse, it'd be right now. So moving forward, I would expect a lot of moves, and you kind of saw this in the works the last couple of years as well with Tyler Johnson, the conversation there. And I think the more likely scenario is that Alex Killorn is going to be moved at some point. I don't know when. It could be very well at the draft. I would very much like to see the Lightning move Killorn for some picks, and that's it. As to what they might get in return for him in terms of picks, I would probably, if I had to speculate right here on the spot, I would say some mid-round, maybe 4, 5. I would be totally fine with that. We have seen from this team, some of the players that the Lightning have drafted over the last 10 years or so, that there is talent in those mid to late rounds. There is talent. Now, it's more of a matter of finding that talent, obviously, and that's where the scouting comes into play and the development over time. But if the Lightning don't get back a 4 or a 3, which the chances of them getting a 3 for Killorn, unless it's down the road, unless it's like a 2025 or a 24. If you're looking to get an immediate draft pick, if you're Julian Brisebois and you're thinking, all right, the talent's good in this draft class right now, but next year's draft and the draft after, there's a lot more talent to be had, then yeah, I wouldn't mind you take a 4, a 5, even possibly a 3, depending on what team if they really want Alex Killorn that bad. I think that's the sweet spot for them. I wouldn't be too upset if you talk a team into giving you a 4th for 2023 and then a 5th or a 6th for 2024, and you just say, here you go, here's your veteran Alex Killorn, enjoy 17, thank you for all your hard work, and that's it. And yeah, it sucks to hear that, but that's the nature of the beast that the Lightning are dealing with right now. But just to sum up what I've said already, I would think it would be somewhat irresponsible to trade away Ryan McDonagh right now at this point in time. You have a guy who is a bona fide leader on this team, a guy other than Victor Hedman, who, when we look at the defensive capabilities as well as the successes on the back end, you can't mention Victor Hedman and not mention Ryan McDonagh in that conversation. And at 33, yes, he is he is very susceptible to injuries, but that's just the way he plays. You're going to have to deal with that. You're going to have to deal with that, just like with any other defenseman or any other player, depending on their style of play. I would rather take Ryan McDonagh and keep him on the team and live with what you might get from him, as you know, he will decline over a certain period of time in the coming years. I'd rather take that. I'd rather, in this situation, especially on the defensive core, stick with what you know, especially at that level. Allow Jan Rutta to walk, like I said. Have Cal Foote, you know what you're going to get out of him, instead of dealing away Ryan McDonagh, keeping Jan Rutta, and then kind of sort of almost having this up in the air conversation in the offseason going into training camp where, all right, who are we gonna have on the back end with Sergachev and Chernak? So I would rather go with those moves. And like maybe I'm right. Maybe Julian Brisebois will make a good move at the deadline. Maybe he'll, hopefully, if he's listening to this, JBB, hopefully you take what I have to say into account. But yeah, I think that these moves, I think that we're at a point in time, and I'm not just saying JBB's he's not above this or at certain points, and I'm going to leave you all with this, and please comment below. What is a move that you would like to see the Lightning make in the offseason? And we'll talk more about that in the next couple episodes to follow, because there are some decisions that need to be made at the draft. Where are the Lightning going to hone in on position-wise? Where do you want to see the Lightning improve, or where do they need to most improve? I have some thoughts in mind with that, but drop it down in the comments below. Let me know what you think, and make sure to always subscribe to the podcast. Follow us on Twitter at LO_Lightning, and then follow us on Instagram at LockedOn_Lightning, and then give us a follow on the channel, Locked On Lightning, of course, and then give me a follow on Twitter at DenkyDank, DENKYD8. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more about offseason moves. Where do the Lightning go from here? Because the conversation is always evolving. We might get another surprise headline tomorrow about another player the Lightning are speaking to, or a different player the Lightning are speaking to about moving them. So in the meantime, that's been it for this episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Adam Danker. I'll talk to you in the next one.